The rain had been falling over Chicago since noon, the kind of steady gray drizzle that made the whole city smell like wet concrete and coffee. Daniel Hayes pulled his old Ford pickup into the parking garage of Meridian Tower at exactly 6:45 in the evening, 45 minutes before his shift as the building's night maintenance supervisor officially began. He liked coming in early. It gave him time to breathe before the chaos of broken elevators. Flickering lights and complaint tickets started piling up on his clipboard. Daniel was 34 years old, a widower, and the father of an 8-year-old girl named Lily who was, without question, the only thing in his life that still made sense. 3 years had passed since his wife, Emily, died in a car accident on the Kennedy Expressway, and in that time Daniel had rebuilt his life piece by piece, the way you rebuild a house after a fire, slowly, carefully, never quite sure if the new walls would hold the weight of everything that came before. He worked 2 jobs. During the day, he fixed HVAC systems for a small contracting company. At night, 3 times a week, he supervised maintenance at Meridian Tower, a 32-story glass building downtown that housed, among other things, the corporate headquarters of Callaway Industries, one of the fastest-growing tech and logistics firms in the Midwest. Daniel didn't know much about Callaway Industries beyond the name on the directory sign in the lobby. He didn't know that the company's CEO, a woman named Sophia Callaway, had taken over the firm at 29 years old after her father's sudden death, inheriting not just a company, but an entire industry's skepticism about whether a young woman could run a $5 billion logistics empire. He didn't know that she worked past midnight most nights, that she ate dinner alone at her desk more often than not, and that behind the confident, composed image she projected in board meetings, she was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. That evening, Daniel's supervisor handed him a work order for the 28th floor, a reported issue with a private elevator access panel near the executive suites. Most of the floor would be empty, he was told. The executives usually left by 6. Daniel took the elevator up, toolbox in hand, badge clipped to his gray uniform shirt, thinking about nothing more complicated than fixing a panel and getting home in time to read Lily her bedtime chapter book. The 28th floor was dim, lit only by the blue emergency lighting strips embedded in the ceiling and the ambient glow of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. Daniel walked down the corridor, checking door numbers against the work order. The private elevator panel was supposed to be behind a door marked 28C in the low light. Exhausted from a 14-hour day, he misread the number on a nearly identical door 2 down from the one he needed, and pushed it open without knocking. "It's fine," she said finally. "Accidents happen. Just knock next time." A small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of her mouth before she turned and walked toward the elevator, heels clicking against the marble floor, leaving Daniel standing there wondering if he'd imagined the whole thing. He didn't think about it again that night, mostly because he was too busy telling himself never to think about it again. But 3 days later, working the same shift, he found a manila folder taped to the door of the maintenance office with his name on it. Inside was a handwritten note. "Elevator panel replaced already, company account. Thank you for not making a bigger deal out of Tuesday than it needed to be. SC." Daniel laughed out loud alone in the small office, for the first time in longer than he could remember. Over the following weeks, small moments accumulated the way small moments do, each one meaningless on its own, but forming a pattern in hindsight. Sophia began staying later some nights, and more than once she found herself in the stairwell instead of the elevator, the kind of stairwell Daniel was often found in, checking fire extinguishers or replacing bulbs. They talked. Not about the company, not about money or mergers, but about ordinary things. A delayed flight she'd had once out of O'Hare, the way Daniel's daughter insisted on sleeping with the hallway light on, a diner on Halstead Street that made pancakes the size of hubcaps. Sophia hadn't talked about ordinary things with anyone in years. Everyone around her wanted strategy, performance, results. Daniel didn't want anything from her at all, which was, strangely, the most disarming thing anyone had done for her since her father died. One night in late October, Sophia stayed at the office past 11, working through a supply chain crisis that threatened to cost the company millions if not resolved by morning. Daniel found her alone in the executive kitchen, staring at a cold cup of coffee. Her shoulders curled in a way that had nothing to do with posture and everything to do with the invisible weight she'd been carrying since she was 29. "You should eat something," he said, setting down his toolbox. "Not coffee, food." "I don't have time." "You don't have a choice. Nobody makes good decisions running on caffeine and adrenaline. Trust me, I raised a kid on that. Combination for a year and almost burned. Down my own kitchen twice." She actually laughed, a real laugh, unguarded. The kind that surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. Daniel left and came back 20 minutes later with 2 containers of pad thai from the place across the street, and they sat on the floor of the executive kitchen at 11:30 at night. The CEO of a $5 billion company and the building's maintenance supervisor, eating noodles out of paper containers, and for the first time in longer than either of them could admit, neither one felt alone. It would be dishonest to say nothing complicated stood in their way. When word began to spread, quietly, the way things always spread in office buildings, that Sophia Calloway had been seen more than once sharing coffee with the maintenance staff, the board took notice. A senior board member named Richard Voss, a man who had wanted Sophia out of the CEO chair since the day she inherited it, saw an opportunity. He raised concerns at a private board meeting about appropriate boundaries and optics framing Daniel as a liability, a distraction from a woman who was already, in his eyes, too young and too unproven to be taken seriously. Sophia was called into a closed-door session and told, in careful corporate language, that her personal associations were becoming a subject of concern among shareholders. She could have backed away. It would have been easy. She had spent her entire career doing what was expected of her, proving herself twice as hard as any man in her position would have had to. But sitting in that boardroom, listening to men twice her age lecture her about optics, something in her finally refused to bend. "With respect," she said. "Standing, I built this company's supply chain, resilience myself over the last 18 months. I saved us from 3 logistics failures your division heads didn't see coming. My personal life is not a line item on this board's agenda, and if it becomes one again, I'll be bringing that concern to the full shareholder meeting, publicly." She left the room before anyone could respond, her heels striking the marble floor with the same sound Daniel had heard that very first night, except now it sounded like something closer to freedom. She found him afterward in the parking garage, loading his toolbox into his truck at the end of his shift, his daughter's crayon drawing taped inside the passenger visor, the way it always was. "I heard there was a whole thing," Daniel said carefully. "About us. I'm sorry if I caused you trouble." "You didn't cause anything," Sophia said. "You reminded me what actually matters. That's not the same thing." She looked at him for a long moment, rain beginning to patter softly against the garage's skylight far above them. "I don't want optics, Daniel. I want dinner. An actual dinner, not noodles on an office floor, though I did love that too." He smiled, the kind of smile that had been rare on his face since Emily died, and said the only thing that felt true. "Lily's going to want to come. Fair warning, she's 8 and she has opinions about pancakes." "Good," Sophia said. "I have opinions about pancakes too." They had that dinner 2 weeks later, and Lily did, in fact, have very strong opinions about pancakes, insisting Sophia try the ones with cinnamon instead of chocolate chips, an opinion Sophia adopted permanently. Over the following year, what began as an accident behind the wrong door slowly became something neither of them had been looking for, and both of them needed, not a fairy tale rescue, not a transformation of one person by another, but 2 people who had each been carrying too much alone, finally setting a little of it down. Richard Voss resigned from the board 8 months later, after an internal review revealed inconsistencies in a supplier contract he'd personally approved, a discovery Sophia made not through vindictiveness but through the same diligence that had made her a good CEO all along. Meridian Tower kept its maintenance contract with Daniel's company, and Daniel kept his night shifts, though he switched most of them to morning so he could be home for Lily's bedtime. Instead of missing it, Sophia started leaving the office by 7 most evenings, a change her assistant noted with quiet astonishment in a company where 7 used to mean lunchtime. On a spring evening the following April, in the small backyard of the house Daniel had spent 3 years slowly repairing after Emily's death, Sophia knelt down to Lily's height and asked her, with far more nervousness than she'd ever shown in a boardroom, if it would be all right with her if Sophia became a permanent part of their family. Lily, who had spent the last year quietly falling in love with pancake opinions and bedtime stories told in two voices instead of one, hugged her so hard she nearly knocked her over. Daniel proposed 3 months after that, not with cameras or a rooftop or anything the tabloids would have wanted from the CEO of Callaway Industries, but in the same executive kitchen where they'd once eaten pad thai off the floor at midnight, the room now quiet. The city lights outside the window looking, for once, like something soft instead of something exhausting. It had all started with a wrong door, a mistake, 4 seconds of pure panic that should have ended a man's career and instead became the beginning of both of their lives finally. Feeling whole again, Sophia often said in the years that followed that she'd spent so long being seen as a CEO, a headline, a name on a door, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to just be seen, until the night a stranger walked through the wrong one, and somehow, impossibly, found exactly the right woman waiting on the other side.